Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is the Iranian British actress and activist Nazanin Boniadi. She joins us from Los Angeles in California. Thank you very much for being with us, Nazanin.
Thanks for having me.
Since mid-September, Iran is going through what many describe as an unprecedented wave of protest. The spark was the death of a 22-year-old woman by the name of Mahsa Amini at the hands of the morality police for not properly wearing the mandatory head veil. The regime has since brutally cracked down. This started as a women's movement, but has galvanized a number of people from across Iran and across all walks of life.
Yes, it is, as you say, unprecedented because the spark and the engine have been women and women's rights and equality and equity for women. And now men and women are standing shoulder to shoulder in what many believe is a turning point for the country, for a pro-democracy movement and freedom against the theocracy.
Since then, the regime has brutally cracked down. It has jailed tens of thousands. It has killed hundreds, sentenced to death dozens of people. And it seems, sadly, that the repression is working because the protests seem to be tapering off. It seems that the regime has managed to crack down and survive.
I can understand how the apparency it appears that way, but I don't think we should gauge this, what many are calling a revolution, and a first female-led revolution of our time, by the number of people currently on the streets. As we know, the crackdowns have been brutal, as you say, and with more than 19,000 protesters arrested in the past 4 months, more than 500 protesters killed and 4 executed for peacefully protesting to date, and with hundreds more at risk. This is something, of course, that people are concerned about on the streets. So their tactics have changed. They may not be coming out as much, but I can assure you the messages I'm hearing from dissidents on the ground in Iran, they have not given up. This is just the beginning. And I think they will come back out on the streets on force. And I think, when you see the repression of women and men like rap artist Tumaj Salehi, who has been tortured, solitary confinement for an extended period of time, for months now. Katayan Riahi, a prominent actress, the first actress to remove her mandatory headscarf just a couple of days after Mahsa was murdered in custody. In solidarity with the woman life freedom movement, and now is at risk of being made an example of for other actors and people in the public eye not to come forward and stand with the protesters. The harsh reality is that young girls like Armita Abbasi, who have suffered unspeakable abuse and rape, and now are at risk of a harsh sentence. These galvanize Iranian society at large to keep going, to stand up for their rights and fight for the freedom they deserve.
Right, and there is also the case of this young couple arrested back in November after a video of them dancing in front of the Azadi Tower in the capital, Tehran, went viral. A revolutionary court just sentenced them to 10 years in jail.
That's exactly right. And when the Iranian people witness things like these grave injustices, it actually inspires them to keep going with this fight. There was a popular slogan: for each person killed, 1,000 rise up behind them, and that's exactly what we've seen in the past 4 months. I would urge international lawmakers to not see this revolution as buried and dead. This is very much ongoing, and civil society in Iran, what people are saying to me on the ground in Iran, is that we're finding ways to end these brutalities and end this theocratic reign. And also, when you see that a French national, it was recently announced that a French national has been detained since September 28th. The threat of this regime is not just on its own people. It is regional. It is global. That's the only language they speak. It's a reign of terror. And until we stand unequivocally with the people of Iran in their aspirations for democracy, the whole world will suffer.
Right, but obviously it's a difficult standpoint, being outside and calling for support, because in one way, if you say people should go out on the streets, given the dangers they face, it's essentially a big threat for them. But then on the other hand, not speaking out is saying the regime won.
Yes, exactly. And one of the many criticisms that people outside of Iran get when they stand up for the people of Iran is, well, you're encouraging people on the streets to go and meet their death. Right. I can assure you, when I speak to people on the ground in Iran, that when every time we stay silent, every time we say, well, we don't want to put them in harm's way, I get messages from inside Iran saying, we are taking to the streets. We need you to make sure that people are seeing what we're seeing, that they're hearing the stories, that they're seeing the images of the brutality that we're experiencing. This is very much everything that I campaign for, at least, comes from civil society and dissidents and families of prisoners inside Iran. So I take my direction from them, directly from them. A great example of this was when the Islamic Republic was expelled from the UN Commission on the Status of Women. Of course, the Vice President of the United States was one of the leaders on an international globe, on an international level, to champion this. But that call very much came from women's rights defenders inside the country, who urged us to relay this message to the US and other authorities to be able to champion this. Then we went from government to government and from ambassador to ambassador at the UN to say that this is very important that you champion the people of Iran. So these calls are very much coming from the people inside Iran. And just as was the case with the UN Commission on the Status of Women, people thought it would be impossible because there was no precedent for it. And in a similar way, I just would urge the international community to stand with the people of Iran, assure that they have internet access, find ways to circumvent internet blackouts. But apart from that, keep going with the sanctions, not only keep going with the sanctions, but enforce the sanctions. Because it's one thing to say we're sanctioning this person, we're sanctioning that person. But when you see oil exports to China increase and that be able to fund the repression of the regime against its own people, that's very worrisome.
Right. You've been actively campaigning. You mentioned the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. You met her at the White House in October. You are now one of the signatories of a petition calling for more sanctions. You're now especially calling the UK, the EU, to list the Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. But what does it change? I mean, yes, okay, it's nice to have them designated as terrorists, but as long as the repression continues, it's not going to change the minds of the regime. The regime has stayed united, unlike many thought. They saw some cracks because of sanctions, but it doesn't seem that way.
You're absolutely right in the sense that this regime doesn't care about being embarrassed. What they do care about is their hands being tied. They don't like when their funding disappears, for their repression disappears. They don't like it when their officials are not able to freely travel to democratic countries and find safe haven in democratic countries. They don't like it when the children of these officials find themselves unable to live freely in democratic countries. So what we have to do is hit them where it hurts, which is make sure that they don't enjoy the freedoms. They themselves and their children don't enjoy the freedoms, that they're denying their own people. So those are the actions that when we say revoke the visas of the people who are responsible for these oppressions, don't allow them to live freely in places like the US, France, the UK, Germany, because we have a responsibility to provide safe haven to the dissidents, to the people whose lives are in danger in Iran, not the officials and not their children, unless they've denounced and cut ties with the regime.
Right, but let's take the example of the French president. He received several women activists a few weeks ago, and then just recently he said he commended, I quote him, the battle of Iranian martyr Mahsa Amini, and he said her fight obliges us. But then what? I mean, some are saying, well, you then cut diplomatic ties with Iran, bring your ambassador back, send the Iranian ambassador out. But that's not happening because of many issues, diplomatic, business, and so on. Would you want to see more than words?
I want to see more than words. The Iranian people deserve more than words. It's a great first step. Nobody denies that solidarity is an important show of support for the people. It encourages them to keep their fight. It boosts morale. But after that, we need punitive measures. We need accountability, because otherwise the Iranian regime will just continue its repression. So I would encourage international lawmakers to find ways to hold the Islamic Republic regime to account. The UN fact-finding mission was an incredibly important step in these protests. But that, of course, we need to make sure that there's oversight. We need to make sure it's well executed, so that when the report comes out next summer, that's not the end of it, that we have a continuing way of holding this regime to account, so that these protests don't keep happening, these uprisings don't keep happening and then getting brutally cracked down on. We have to empower civil society inside Iran to find the freedoms they deserve.
Nazanin, just as a conclusion, all those events are touching you personally. I understand you put your acting career on hold for now. I mean, is it possible for you to resume acting while this is going on?
I, of course, have to make a living, and I love what I do as an actor. So for 4 months now, I've only been focused on this, and I will continue to be focused on this as long as the Iranian people need me, because this is an unprecedented moment, and I truly believe it will lead to change.
Nazanin Boniadi, I want to thank you very much for appearing here on the France 24 interview from Los Angeles. Thank you all for watching it.
Thank you.